My name is Mia Jones. I'm 23 years old, and I was delivering pizza in Los Angeles when the customer tipped me $200. Then I saw a photo of my mom on his wall. I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? How could a complete stranger have a picture of someone so personal to me hanging in his living room like she was part of his life? That moment changed everything I thought I knew about my past, about my mom, and about the secrets she'd been keeping from me my entire life. Have you ever discovered something that made you question everything you believed about someone you loved? If you have, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is going to take you on a journey you won't forget. I promise you, by the end of this, you'll be asking yourself what you would do if you were in my shoes. Let me take you back to that day, because honestly, it started like any other shift. I was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep, balancing college classes during the day and pizza deliveries at night just to keep my head above water. Los Angeles is expensive, and when you're trying to pay tuition while covering rent in a tiny studio apartment, every dollar counts. I'd been working for Tony's Pizzeria for about 8 months at that point, and the job was simple. Take the orders, drive across the city, hand over the pizza, collect a tip if I was lucky, and move on to the next one. Most people were polite, some were rude, and a few forgot to tip altogether. That was just the reality of the gig, and I'd accepted it. But that night, something felt different the moment I pulled up to the address. It was a beautiful house in Silver Lake, one of those modern places with big windows and clean lines that screamed money. I remember thinking to myself, okay, maybe this one will tip well, but I wasn't expecting much. Rich people could be the stingiest sometimes. I grabbed the 2 large pepperoni pizzas from the passenger seat, straightened my uniform, and walked up to the front door. My hands were shaking a little, not from nerves, but from exhaustion. I'd been on my feet for 6 hours straight, and this was my last delivery before I could finally go home and collapse into bed. When the door opened, I was greeted by a man in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. He had kind eyes, the sort of face that looked like it had seen a lot of life, but hadn't let it harden him. He smiled at me warmly, took the pizzas, and then did something I wasn't expecting. He handed me a $200 bill. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the money in my hand like it was some kind of prank. $200 for a $30 order? I looked up at him, stammered something like, "Sir, this is way too much." But he just shook his head and said, "You look like you've had a long day. Keep it." I didn't know what to say, so I thanked him about 5 times, probably sounded like an idiot, and turned to leave. But then I glanced inside his house, just for a second, and that's when I saw it. Hanging on the wall in his living room, right next to a bookshelf, was a framed photograph of my mom. Not someone who looked like her, not a look-alike. It was her. Same smile, same eyes, same everything. My heart stopped, and suddenly the $200 in my hand didn't matter anymore. All I could think was, why does this man have a picture of my mother in his house? And more importantly, who the hell is he? If you've ever felt like you're living your life on autopilot, like you're just going through the motions without anything exciting or meaningful happening, then you'll understand exactly how I felt before that delivery. My life had become this endless cycle of waking up, going to class, delivering pizzas, and then crashing into bed only to do it all over again the next day. I wasn't unhappy, but I wasn't happy either. I was just existing. And the truth is, I'd been existing like that for years, ever since my mom passed away when I was 17. She was my whole world. And when she died, it felt like a part of me died with her. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible, like the world is moving around you and you're just a background character in your own story. My mom raised me on her own, and she never talked much about her past. Whenever I asked about my dad, or about her life before I was born, she'd smile and change the subject. As a kid, I didn't push it because I figured she'd tell me when she was ready, but she never did. And after she died, I was left with all these unanswered questions that I'd never get the chance to ask. Who was my father? Did she have family I didn't know about? Why did she always seem so guarded, like she was protecting some secret she couldn't share? For years, I buried those questions because digging into them hurt too much. It was easier to just keep moving forward, to focus on surviving rather than understanding. But standing on that porch, staring at her picture in a stranger's house, all those questions came rushing back like a tidal wave. My hands started trembling, and I felt this mix of anger, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was hope. Hope that I might finally get some answers about the woman who raised me, about the life she lived before I came into the picture. I wanted to march back into that house, demand to know who this man was and why he had her photo, but my feet felt glued to the ground. I was terrified of what I might discover, terrified that the truth would shatter the image I had of her in my mind. Instead, I walked back to my car in a daze, got in, and just sat there for what felt like forever. My phone buzzed with another delivery request, but I ignored it. I couldn't focus on anything except that photo. The way it was framed, the way it sat on his wall like it belonged there, like she had been an important part of his life. Who was he to her? A friend? Something more? And why had she never mentioned him? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't really know my mom at all. I'd spent my entire childhood and teenage years with her, and yet she'd managed to keep this entire side of herself hidden from me. It felt like a betrayal, even though I knew she must have had her reasons. By the time I drove home that night, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. I couldn't. For 6 years, I'd been living in the shadow of her death, carrying around this weight of grief and unanswered questions. And now, out of nowhere, the universe had dropped a clue right in front of me. I didn't know where it would lead or what I'd find, but I knew I had to follow it. Because if there was even a chance that I could learn more about who my mom really was, about the secrets she kept and the life she lived, then I owed it to myself to try. You won't believe what happened next. And trust me, this is just the beginning of a story that's going to turn everything upside down. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that my tired brain had played tricks on me and the woman in that photo wasn't actually my mom. But deep down, I knew the truth. I'd spent 23 years looking at her face, in old photo albums, in the framed picture on my nightstand, in my memories, and there was no mistaking it. That was her. And the fact that this man, this complete stranger, had her picture hanging in his house like she meant something to him kept me awake at night. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through 1,000 different scenarios in my head. Maybe he was an old friend from college. Maybe they worked together at some point. Or maybe, and this was the thought that scared me the most, maybe he was my father. If you're watching this and you've ever had your world turned upside down by a single moment, please hit that like button and subscribe, because I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you next is going to get even more intense. The logical part of my brain told me to just let it go, to move on with my life and stop digging into a past that my mom clearly wanted to keep buried. But the emotional part, the part that had spent 6 years grieving and questioning and wondering who she really was, couldn't do that. I needed answers. So I did something that probably sounds crazy. I looked up the address from that delivery, found the guy's name through a quick online search, and started researching him. His name was David Hartman, and from what I could find, he was a retired professor of literature who'd taught at UCLA for over 30 years. He lived alone, had no social media presence, and seemed to keep a pretty low profile. There wasn't much information about him online, which only made me more curious. Who was this man, and what was his connection to my mom? For about a week, I drove past his house every day after my shift, trying to work up the courage to knock on his door and just ask him directly. But every time I got close, I'd chicken out. What was I supposed to say? Hi, remember me? I delivered your pizza last week. By the way, why do you have a picture of my dead mom in your living room? It sounded insane even in my head. Plus, part of me was terrified of what he might tell me. What if the truth was worse than not knowing? What if my mom had done something she was ashamed of, something that would change the way I remembered her? Those fears kept me frozen, stuck in this weird limbo where I desperately wanted answers, but was too scared to actually go get them. But then something happened that forced my hand. I was scrolling through my mom's old belongings one night, boxes of stuff I'd kept stored in my closet since she died, and I found an old journal of hers. I'd never read it before because it felt like an invasion of her privacy, but now, with everything that had happened, I couldn't resist. I flipped through the pages, most of which were filled with mundane stuff like grocery lists and random thoughts. But then I came across an entry from about 25 years ago. It was short, just a few sentences, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. She wrote, I saw David today. It's been 3 years, and it still hurts. I wonder if he ever thinks about me the way I think about him. My hands were shaking as I read those words over and over again. David. It had to be the same David. It had to be. That journal entry changed everything. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a desperate need to understand the relationship between my mom and this man who clearly meant something to her. The next day, I drove straight to his house, marched up to the front door, and knocked before I could talk myself out of it. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see me, but not in a bad way. He smiled that same warm smile he'd given me during the pizza delivery and said, Mia, right? I wasn't expecting to see you again. The fact that he remembered my name sent a chill down my spine. How did he know who I was? And what else did he know about me? I stood there on his doorstep, my mouth dry, trying to form words that wouldn't come out. Finally, I managed to say, "I need to talk to you about my mom." His expression shifted instantly, the warmth in his eyes replaced by something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or regret. He nodded slowly and stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in. As I walked into his house, my eyes immediately went to that photo on the wall, the one that had haunted me for the past week. Seeing it again in the daylight made it all feel so much more real. That was my mom, young and smiling, frozen in a moment I'd never been a part of. I turned to David and asked the question that had been eating me alive. "How do you know her?" He looked at the photo, then back at me and said, "I think you'd better sit down." Have you ever had a moment where you knew your life was about to change forever? Drop a like and subscribe if you're still with me, because what he told me next shattered everything I thought I knew. David led me to his living room, and we sat down on opposite ends of his couch. For a moment, neither of us said anything. He just stared at his hands, like he was trying to figure out where to start. Finally, he looked up at me and said, "Your mom and I were together a long time ago. We were in love, actually. But things didn't work out the way we hoped they would." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean, didn't work out?" I asked. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "We met when we were both in grad school. She was brilliant, funny, and had this way of making everyone around her feel important. We dated for about 2 years, and I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives together. But then, she left, just disappeared one day without any explanation. I tried to find her, but she didn't want to be found." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mom had never mentioned any of this to me. She'd always been so private about her past, but I never imagined it was because she was running from something or someone. "Why did she leave?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. David looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I don't know for sure, but I think she was scared. Scared of commitment, scared of getting hurt, or maybe scared of something else entirely. She never gave me the chance to find out." His words hung in the air, heavy and painful. I could see the hurt in his eyes. Even after all these years, he still cared about her. Maybe he'd never stopped. I wanted to be angry at my mom for keeping all of this from me, for leaving behind so many unanswered questions. But I also felt this overwhelming sadness for her, and for David. Whatever had driven them apart must have been something serious, something she couldn't talk about even with her own daughter. "When did you find out who I was?" I asked. David smiled faintly. "The moment you walked up to my door with those pizzas. You looked just like her, you know. Same eyes, same smile. I couldn't believe it. After all these years, there you were, standing on my doorstep like some kind of sign from the universe." He paused, then added, "That's why I gave you that tip. I wanted to do something, anything, to help you, even if you didn't know who I was." His confession made my heart ache. Here was a man who'd loved my mom so much that he'd held onto her memory for decades, and when he saw me, a stranger who just happened to be her daughter, he'd tried to help me in the only way he could. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there, processing everything he'd told me. But one question still burned in my mind, the one I was almost too afraid to ask. "Are you my father?" David's eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he might say yes. But then he shook his head. "No, Mia, I'm not your father. Your mom left me about a year before you were born. I don't know who your father is, but I can tell you this. Whoever he was a lucky man." Those words should have brought me relief, but instead, they just left me with more questions. If David wasn't my dad, then who was? And what was I supposed to do with all this information? I left David's house that day with more questions than answers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much he wasn't telling me. He'd given me a piece of the puzzle, but it was just one piece out of what felt like 1,000. My mom had been in love with him. She'd left him without explanation, and then a year later, I was born. The timeline didn't add up in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened in that missing year. Where had she gone? Who had she been with? And most importantly, why had she kept all of this hidden from me for my entire life? If you've ever felt like the more you learn about someone, the less you actually know them, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and hit the like, because this journey is about to get a whole lot more complicated. I need you with me for what comes next. The day after my conversation with David, I called in sick to work and spent the entire day going through every box of my mom's belongings that I'd kept stored away. I was looking for anything that might give me more clues about her past. Old letters, photos, journals, anything. Most of what I found was pretty ordinary. Bills, old tax documents, birthday cards from friends I'd never met. But then, buried at the bottom of one of the boxes, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. It was locked, and I didn't have a key, so I did what any desperate person would do. I broke it open with a screwdriver. Inside, I found a stack of letters, all addressed to my mom, and all from someone named M. The letters were dated between 24 and 25 years ago, right around the time she would have been with David, or shortly after. I started reading the letters, and with each one, I felt my heart sink deeper into my stomach. They were love letters, filled with passion and longing, and it was clear that whoever M was, they had been deeply in love with my mom. But what struck me the most was the tone of the later letters. They became more desperate, more pleading. M was begging my mom to come back, to give them another chance, to not throw away what they had. And then, in the very last letter, dated just a few months before I was born, M wrote, "I understand your decision, and I respect it, even though it breaks my heart. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for, and I hope the baby brings you all the joy you deserve." My hands were shaking as I read those words. The baby. That was me. M had known about me. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. M had to be my father. But who was he? The letters didn't have a return address, and they were signed with just that single initial. I spent hours searching through the rest of my mom's things, looking for anything that might tell me who M was, but I came up empty. It was like she deliberately erased him from her life, leaving behind just enough to haunt me but not enough to give me answers. I felt angry, frustrated, and heartbroken all at once. Why would she do this to me? Why would she keep me from knowing who my father was? And why had she gone to such great lengths to hide her past? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about David, about the letters, about my mom, and all the secrets she'd carried with her to her grave. I realized that if I wanted real answers, I was going to have to keep digging, no matter how painful it might be. So I made a plan. I'd go back to David and show him the letters. Maybe he'd recognize the handwriting, or maybe he'd know who M was. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. The next morning, I drove back to his house, clutching the letters in my hand like they were some kind of lifeline. When David opened the door and saw the look on my face, he immediately knew something had changed, and what he told me when I showed him those letters was something I never could have prepared myself for. David invited me back into his living room, and this time, there was a heaviness in the air that hadn't been there before. I handed him the stack of letters, and as he read through them, I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition. When he finally looked up at me, there were tears in his eyes. "I know who M is," he said quietly. My heart started racing. "Who?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. He took a deep breath and said, Michael Brennan. He was my best friend." I felt like the ground had just dropped out from under me. David's best friend? That meant David had known my father this whole time, and he hadn't said a word about it during our first conversation. The betrayal I felt in that moment was almost overwhelming. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. David looked down at his hands, shame written all over his face. "Because it's complicated, Mia. And because I didn't know for sure that Michael was your father. I suspected it, but I didn't have proof." He paused, then continued. "After your mom left me, she and Michael got close. Really close. I didn't know about it at first, but when I found out, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. My girlfriend and my best friend. I cut them both out of my life and never looked back." His voice cracked on those last words, and I could see how much pain this was still causing him, even after all these years. But I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for him in that moment. All I cared about was finding my father. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Where's Michael?" David hesitated, and I could tell he didn't want to answer. Finally, he said, "I don't know. After everything happened, he tried to reach out to me a few times, but I refused to talk to him. The last I heard, he'd moved out of state. Somewhere on the East Coast, maybe. But that was over 20 years ago. I have no idea where he is now, or even if he's still alive." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. My father could be anywhere, or he could be dead, and I might never get the chance to meet him or ask him the questions that had been burning inside me my whole life. The injustice of it all made me want to scream. But then David said something that gave me a sliver of hope. "There's one person who might know where Michael is. A mutual friend of ours from grad school. A woman named Sarah Klein. She and Michael stayed in touch for a while after everything happened. If anyone knows where he is, it would be her." He got up, walked over to a desk in the corner of the room, and pulled out an old address book. He flipped through it, found Sarah's name, and wrote down her contact information on a piece of paper. "I can't promise she'll talk to you," he said, handing me the paper. "But it's worth a shot." I took the paper from him, feeling a mix of gratitude and resentment. Gratitude because he was finally giving me something to go on, and resentment because he'd withheld this information from me in the first place. Before I left, I turned back to David and asked him one more question. "Did you ever forgive them? My mom and Michael?" He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. No, I never did. And that's something I've had to live with for the past 25 years. Holding on to that anger, that bitterness, it's eaten away at me in ways I didn't even realize until recently. Seeing you, talking to you, it's made me realize how much time I've wasted being angry at people who are no longer in my life. His words stayed with me as I drove home that day. Forgiveness. It was something I hadn't really thought about until that moment, but it was starting to feel like the key to unlocking not just my mom's past, but my own future as well. And I had no idea if I was capable of it. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about my mom and all the versions of her I'd never known. The woman who raised me was loving, hardworking, and fiercely protective, but she was also guarded in ways I'd never fully understood until now. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, memories started flooding back, little moments from my childhood that suddenly made more sense in light of everything I'd learned, like the way she'd tense up whenever someone asked about my father, or how she'd quickly change the subject if I ever pushed too hard for answers. I used to think she was just private, but now I realized she was hiding something much bigger. If you've ever looked back on your childhood and seen it in a completely different light, drop a like and subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this all comes together. Trust me, the pieces are finally starting to fit. I remembered one particular moment when I was about 12 years old. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and I'd asked her for the 100th time about my dad. Mom, why won't you tell me about him? Don't I have a right to know? She'd looked at me with such sadness in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might finally open up. But then she just shook her head and said, "Some things are better left in the past, Mia. I'm protecting you, even if you don't understand that right now." At the time, I'd been furious with her, stomped off to my room and slammed the door. But now, sitting here with all these letters and revelations, I wondered what she'd been protecting me from. Was it shame? Regret? Or was she trying to shield me from the pain of knowing that my father had wanted her, but she'd chosen to walk away? Another memory surfaced, this one from when I was about 15. My mom and I had been watching a movie together, some romantic drama about second chances and lost love. There was a scene where the main character ran into an old flame after years apart, and I noticed my mom crying quietly beside me. I'd asked her what was wrong, and she'd wiped her tears and said, "Nothing, sweetheart, just hormones." But I could see it in her face. She was thinking about someone who'd meant something to her. Was it David, Michael, or someone else entirely? The thought that my mom had carried this weight of heartbreak and secrecy for so many years made my chest ache. She'd been so strong for me, always putting on a brave face, but she'd been suffering in silence the whole time. I also remembered how she'd react whenever we'd pass by couples on the street, holding hands or laughing together. She'd get this distant look in her eyes, like she was somewhere else entirely. I used to think she was just lonely, that she wanted companionship but was too busy raising me to go looking for it. But now I understood that she wasn't looking forward to finding someone new. She was looking backward at what she'd lost. David had been right when he said she was scared. Scared of commitment, scared of getting hurt, or maybe scared of something even deeper that I still hadn't uncovered. And whatever that fear was, it had been strong enough to make her walk away from not one, but two men who'd loved her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my mom had been running from something her entire life. She'd moved us around a lot when I was younger. Different apartments, different neighborhoods, always staying just a few steps ahead of what? I'd never questioned it before, just assumed she was chasing better job opportunities or cheaper rent. But what if she'd been running from her past? From David, from Michael, from the choices she'd made? The thought made me feel both closer to her and more distant at the same time. I wanted to understand her, to know what had driven her to make the decisions she'd made, but she wasn't here to explain it to me. All I had were fragments, letters, photos, and the testimonies of people who'd loved her and lost her. And somehow, I had to piece it all together into something that made sense, something that could help me understand not just who she was, but who I was supposed to be. The next morning, I worked up the courage to call Sarah Klein, the woman David had mentioned as someone who might know where Michael was. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number he'd given me, and I almost hung up 3 times before someone finally answered. "Hello?" came a warm, slightly raspy voice on the other end. "Hi, my name is Mia Jones. I'm looking for someone named Michael Brennan, and I was told you might be able to help me." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought she might hang up on me. But then she said, "Michael Brennan. Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. May I ask why you're looking for him?" I took a deep breath and said, "I think he might be my father." Another pause, longer this time, and then, "Oh my God, you must be Anna's daughter." Hearing Sarah say my mom's name, Anna, sent a chill down my spine. It made everything feel so real, so immediate. "You knew my mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I did," Sarah replied. Not well, but well enough to know that she was a complicated woman who loved deeply and hurt just as deeply. If Michael is your father, and I suspect he is, then you deserve to know the truth. She agreed to meet with me that afternoon at a coffee shop in Pasadena, and I spent the next few hours in a state of nervous anticipation. What would she tell me? Would she have answers or just more questions? When I finally walked into that coffee shop and saw Sarah sitting at a corner table, I knew my life was about to change again. Sarah was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back in a loose bun and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She stood up when she saw me and pulled me into an unexpected hug. You look just like her, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's like seeing a ghost. We sat down, and she ordered us both coffee, though I could barely focus on anything except what she was about to tell me. Michael and your mother, she began. They had a love story that was beautiful and tragic all at once. They met right after she and David broke up, and I think they both saw in each other something they desperately needed. For Michael, Anna was this wild, free spirit who made him feel alive. And for Anna, Michael was stability, someone who wouldn't judge her for her past. So what happened? I asked. Why did she leave him too? Sarah sighed and stirred her coffee slowly, as if gathering her thoughts. Your mom found out she was pregnant with you, and I think it scared her more than anything in the world. She'd already walked away from one relationship, and the idea of committing to another one, of building a life with Michael and raising a child together, was too much for her. She told Michael she needed time to think, and then she just disappeared. He searched for her everywhere, but she'd made up her mind. She was going to do it on her own. I felt tears stinging my eyes. So he knew about me? He knew I existed? Sarah nodded. He did, and it broke his heart. He wanted to be a father to you, but your mom wouldn't let him. She sent him that final letter, the one you probably found, telling him to move on and let her go. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down my cheeks, and Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I'm so sorry, Mia. I know this is a lot to process. I wiped my eyes and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since this whole thing started. Where is he now? Where's Michael? Sarah took a deep breath and said, He lives in Boston. He's a professor at Boston University. Teaches philosophy. I haven't spoken to him in a few years, but last I heard he was doing well. He never married, never had other children. I think, in his own way, he's been waiting for you. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and then wrote down an address and phone number on a napkin. Here, this is his information. I can't promise he'll want to talk to you, but knowing Michael, I think he will. He's a good man, Mia. Your mom may have had her reasons for keeping you apart, but you deserve to know him. I left that coffee shop with a napkin clutched in my hand and a million emotions swirling inside me. Anger at my mom for keeping me from my father. Sadness for all the years we'd lost. And hope, fragile, tentative hope, that maybe, just maybe, I could finally have the answers I'd been searching for. But there was also fear. What if Michael didn't want to meet me? What if he'd moved on and seeing me would just reopen old wounds? I spent the next few days agonizing over what to do, but eventually I knew I had to take the leap. I had to reach out to him even if it meant facing rejection, because living with the questions was worse than any answer he could give me. And so, one evening, I picked up my phone, dialed the number Sarah had given me, and waited for my father to answer. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up, and when I heard his voice for the first time, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Hello? He said, and there was something in his tone, warm, patient, steady, that made me want to cry. Hi, I managed to say, my voice shaking. My name is Mia Jones. I think you might be my father. There was complete silence on the other end of the line, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might hang up. But then I heard him take a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Mia, I've been waiting for this call for 23 years. Those words broke something open inside me, and I started crying right there on the phone with a man I'd never met. If you're still watching and you want to see how this story ends, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like because we're getting to the most emotional part of this whole journey, and I need you with me. We talked for hours that night, and it felt like we were trying to make up for all the lost time in a single conversation. Michael told me about how he'd fallen in love with my mom, how they'd planned a future together, and how devastated he'd been when she'd left. I wanted to find you, he said, his voice cracking. I tried so many times over the years, but your mom had made it clear that she wanted to do this alone. I respected her decision, even though it killed me. But not a day went by that I didn't think about you. Wonder what you looked like, what kind of person you were becoming. Hearing him say that, knowing that I'd had a father out there who'd cared about me all this time, was overwhelming in the best and worst way possible. We made plans to meet in person the following week. He offered to fly out to Los Angeles, but I told him I'd come to Boston instead. I needed to see where he lived, to step into his world and understand who he was. The flight felt endless, and I spent the entire time rehearsing what I'd say to him, how I'd react when I finally saw him face to face. But when I walked out of the airport and saw him standing there, holding a sign with my name on it and wearing the biggest, most nervous smile I'd ever seen, all my carefully planned words disappeared. I just walked up to him, and without saying anything, he pulled me into a hug. We stood there in the middle of the airport, two strangers who were also family, holding on to each other like we were afraid to let go. Over the next few days, Michael showed me his life. His apartment was filled with books, philosophy texts, novels, poetry collections, and on his desk, I saw a framed photo of my mom, the same one David had on his wall. "I've kept that picture all these years," he told me. "It was the only piece of her I had left." He also showed me a box he'd kept hidden in his closet, filled with things he'd collected for me over the years. Birthday cards he'd never sent, Christmas presents he'd never been able to give, letters he'd written but never mailed. "I know it's silly," he said, looking embarrassed, "but it made me feel like I was still a part of your life, even if you didn't know I existed." I couldn't stop crying as I looked through that box, at all the evidence of a love that had existed in secret for over 2 decades. We talked about everything: his career, my mom, my childhood, his regrets. He asked me 1,000 questions about what she'd been like as a mother, and I told him stories that made him laugh and cry at the same time. "She was a good mom," I said. "Protective, maybe overly so, but she loved me with everything she had." Michael nodded, wiping his eyes. "That sounds like Anna. She was always so afraid of failing the people she loved. I think that's why she pushed us all away. She thought she was protecting us from her own flaws." His words gave me a new perspective on my mom, one that was complicated and messy, but also deeply human. She hadn't been perfect, and her choices had hurt people, but she'd been doing the best she could with the pain she carried. And somehow, knowing that made it a little easier to forgive her. After spending a week in Boston with Michael, I flew back to Los Angeles with a head full of new memories and a heart that felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. I finally had answers to the questions that had haunted me my entire life, but those answers came with a price. I couldn't stop thinking about all the years my mom had kept Michael away from me, all the birthdays and holidays and ordinary moments we could have shared if she'd just been honest. The anger I felt toward her was real and raw, and it mixed with the grief I still carried from losing her. How could she have done this to me? How could she have robbed me of a father who clearly loved me and wanted to be part of my life? Those questions kept me up at night, and I didn't have anyone to answer them except the memory of a woman who was no longer here to defend herself. I started seeing a therapist to help me process everything, and one of the first things she asked me was, "Do you think your mother's decision came from a place of love or fear?" I didn't have an answer right away, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was probably both. My mom had loved me fiercely, and I truly believed she thought she was doing what was best for me by raising me on her own. But she'd also been terrified of commitment, of vulnerability, of opening herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. And that fear had led her to make choices that not only hurt her, but hurt everyone around her, including me. Understanding that didn't make the pain go away, but it did help me see her as a whole person, not just the saint I'd put on a pedestal after her death. The hardest part was realizing that I'd spent my entire life believing a version of my mom that wasn't completely true. She'd been my hero, the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give me a good life, and in many ways, that was accurate. But she'd also been selfish, scared, and flawed in ways I'd never imagined. And accepting that meant accepting that the foundation of my entire childhood had been built on a lie. Not a malicious one, but a lie nonetheless. It felt like mourning her all over again. But this time I was mourning the loss of the illusion I'd had about who she was. And that grief was just as painful as the grief I'd felt when she'd first died. But there was also something liberating about finally knowing the truth. For years I'd felt like there was this huge piece of my identity missing, and now I had it. I knew who my father was. I knew why my mom had made the choices she did. And I knew that I came from people who, despite their flaws, had loved deeply and tried their best. That knowledge gave me a sense of completeness I'd never had before. And it made me realize that I didn't have to choose between being angry at my mom and loving her. I could hold both of those feelings at the same time, and that was okay. She'd hurt me, but she'd also given me life and raised me to be strong and independent. And I could honor both of those truths without betraying either one. I also started to understand the weight of the secrets my mom had carried. She'd walked away from 2 men who loved her, kept my father away from me for my entire life, and carried the guilt of those decisions to her grave. That must have been an incredibly heavy burden to bear, and I couldn't imagine how lonely she must have felt. Part of me wished she'd trusted me enough to tell me the truth, to let me in on the pain she was carrying so I could have helped her shoulder it. But another part of me understood that she was trying to protect me from that burden, even if her methods were misguided. And as I sat with those conflicting emotions, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about saying what she did was okay. It was about choosing to let go of the anger that was eating me alive and finding a way to move forward. About a month after returning from Boston, I found myself standing at a crossroads. I had Michael in my life now, and that was incredible. But I also had to figure out what that meant for me moving forward. Did I want him to be a regular part of my life? Did I want to build a relationship with him? Or was knowing the truth enough? These weren't easy questions, and the answers weren't immediately clear. I also had to decide what to do about my relationship with my mom's memory. Could I honor her while also acknowledging the pain her choices had caused? Or would I spend the rest of my life caught between love and resentment, unable to fully embrace either one? The weight of these decisions felt crushing sometimes, and I realized that discovering the truth had been the easy part. Living with it was going to be the real challenge. Michael and I had been talking on the phone regularly since I'd left Boston, and he'd made it clear that he wanted to be in my life in whatever capacity I was comfortable with. "I don't want to pressure you, Mia," he'd said during one of our conversations. "I know this is all overwhelming, and I know I can't just step in and be your dad after 23 years, but I want you to know that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need from me, whether it's daily calls or just checking in once a month, I'll take it. I just want to be part of your life." His words were so genuine and patient that they made me cry. Here was a man who'd been denied the chance to be my father, and yet he was still putting my needs and comfort above his own desires. It made me love him even more, but it also made the decision harder. How could I not let him in after everything he'd been through? At the same time, I was struggling with guilt. Guilt for being angry at my mom, guilt for potentially replacing her memory with a new relationship with Michael, and guilt for all the years he'd spent alone because of her choices. My therapist helped me see that guilt was a natural part of grief, but that it didn't have to control my decisions. "You're allowed to be angry at your mom and still love her," she told me. "And you're allowed to build a relationship with Michael without feeling like you're betraying her. These two things can coexist, Mia. They have to, because that's the messy reality of being human." Her words gave me permission to stop trying to put everything in neat little boxes and just feel whatever came up, even when those feelings contradicted each other. I also had to figure out what to do about David. He'd been the catalyst for all of this. The person who'd inadvertently set me on this journey by having that photo of my mom on his wall. Part of me wanted to thank him, to let him know that because of him, I'd found my father and gotten the answers I'd been searching for. But another part of me was still angry at him for not being honest with me from the beginning, for making me dig for information that he could have easily provided. Eventually, I decided to reach out to him. I sent him a text asking if we could meet for coffee, and he agreed immediately. When we sat down together, I told him everything that had happened, meeting Michael, learning the truth about my mom's past, and the complicated emotions I was working through. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said something that surprised me. "I'm sorry, Mia. I should have been upfront with you from the start. I was trying to protect myself from old pain, but in doing so, I made things harder for you, and I'm truly sorry for that." His apology meant more to me than I expected it to. It wasn't just about him acknowledging his role in all of this. It was about him showing me that people could own their mistakes and try to make things right. That conversation with David helped me see that forgiveness wasn't a one-time decision. It was something you had to choose over and over again, with every person who'd hurt you, including yourself. And as I left that coffee shop, I felt a little bit lighter, like I'd taken another step toward healing. But I also knew that the hardest decision was still ahead of me, deciding what kind of relationship I wanted with Michael and figuring out how to move forward without my mom here to explain herself or ask for forgiveness. That uncertainty was terrifying, but it was also strangely freeing because for the first time in my life, I got to choose my own path forward. Forgiveness became the central theme of my healing journey, but it wasn't the kind of forgiveness you see in movies, where someone has a big epiphany and everything suddenly becomes okay. Real forgiveness, I learned, is messy and complicated, and sometimes feels impossible. There were days when I'd think I'd forgiven my mom for keeping Michael from me, and then something would trigger me. A memory, a photo, a conversation, and all the anger would come rushing back. I'd feel like I was right back at square one, stuck in this cycle of pain and resentment that I couldn't escape. But my therapist helped me understand that forgiveness isn't linear. It's a process, and sometimes you have to forgive the same person for the same thing multiple times before it finally sticks. One of the biggest breakthroughs I had was realizing that forgiveness wasn't about saying what my mom did was okay. It was about releasing the hold that her choices had on my life. As long as I held on to the anger and the hurt, I was giving her decisions power over my present and my future. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life defined by what she'd done or hadn't done. I wanted to define myself, to build a life that was mine, not one that was constantly shadowed by her secrets. And the only way to do that was to let go of the need for her to have been perfect, to accept that she was flawed and human and did the best she could with the tools she had. Forgiving Michael's absence from my life was easier in some ways, because he'd been kept away against his will. But there was still a part of me that wondered why he hadn't fought harder to find me, why he'd accepted my mom's decision without pushing back. When I finally asked him about it, he was honest with me. I thought about it 1,000 times, Mia. I thought about hiring a private investigator, showing up on her doorstep, demanding to be part of your life, but your mom made it very clear that if I did any of those things, she'd disappear again, and I'd lose even the small possibility of ever meeting you. So I waited. I trusted that if it was meant to happen, it would. And here we are. His answer didn't erase the years we'd lost, but it helped me understand that he'd been in an impossible situation, and he'd done what he thought was best at the time. And that was enough. Forgiving David was perhaps the most unexpected part of my journey. He'd been hurt by my mom too, and instead of dealing with that pain in a healthy way, he'd held on to it for decades, letting it poison his relationships and his peace of mind. But seeing him acknowledge his mistakes and genuinely apologize showed me that it's never too late to choose healing over bitterness. And in a strange way, his story became a cautionary tale for me. I didn't want to end up like him, alone and consumed by the past. I wanted to learn from my mom's mistakes and his, and choose a different path, a path that included forgiveness, vulnerability, and the courage to build new relationships even when the old ones had failed. The most difficult person to forgive, though, was myself. I carried so much guilt for being angry at my mom, for questioning her choices, for sometimes wishing she'd done things differently. I felt like I was betraying her memory every time I acknowledged her flaws or admitted that her decisions had hurt me. But over time, I came to understand that loving someone doesn't mean pretending they were perfect. It means seeing them fully, the good and the bad, and choosing to love them anyway. My mom made mistakes, big ones, but she also gave me life and raised me to be strong and independent. And I could hold both of those truths without diminishing either one. Forgiving myself for having complicated feelings about her was the final piece of the puzzle, and it was the one that set me free. 6 months after that first phone call with Michael, I flew back to Boston for Thanksgiving. It felt surreal, sitting at a dinner table with a man I was still getting to know but who was undeniably my father. He'd invited a few of his close friends, including Sarah Klein, and as we sat around that table sharing stories and laughter, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: belonging. These people didn't know me well yet, but they welcomed me with open arms because they cared about Michael, and because they understood how important this was to both of us. Michael stood up during dinner and made a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "For 23 years, I had a daughter I couldn't meet," he said, his voice shaking. "And now she's here and I get to spend every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary day with her if she'll have me. I'm the luckiest man alive." I couldn't hold back my tears, and neither could he. We'd both lost so much time, but we were choosing to focus on what we'd gained rather than what we'd missed. Building a relationship with Michael wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of all those lost years would crash down on us, and we'd both feel the sadness of what could have been. He'd missed my first steps, my first day of school, my graduation, all the milestones that parents treasure. And I'd grown up without a father figure, without someone to teach me how to change a tire or to scare away bad boyfriends, or to just be there when I needed him. We couldn't get those moments back, no matter how much we both wished we could. But what we could do was create new memories, build new traditions, and learn to be father and daughter in our own unique way. And slowly, that's exactly what we did. We'd video chat every Sunday morning over coffee, send each other random texts throughout the week, and plan visits whenever our schedules allowed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. I also started to make peace with my mom's memory in a way I hadn't been able to before. I visited her grave for the first time since learning the truth, and I sat there for hours, just talking to her. I told her about Michael, about how amazing he was and how much I wished she'd given him the chance to be in my life. But I also told her that I understood she'd been scared, that she'd done what she thought was best, and that I was choosing to forgive her. "I'm not saying what you did was right, Mom," I said out loud, my voice breaking, "but I'm saying I understand. And I'm letting go of the anger because holding on to it is only hurting me. You gave me life, and you loved me the best way you knew how, and that has to be enough." I left a bouquet of her favorite flowers on her grave and walked away feeling lighter than I had in months. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about freeing yourself from the prison of resentment. My relationship with David also evolved in unexpected ways. We stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every few weeks to talk about my mom, about Michael, and about how we were both learning to let go of the past. David had been carrying his hurt for 25 years, and watching me work through my own pain seemed to inspire him to do the same. "You've taught me something important, Mia," he told me during one of our conversations. "You've shown me that it's never too late to choose healing over bitterness, and I'm grateful for that." We'd never be as close as I was with Michael, but there was something meaningful about our connection. He'd loved my mom once, and in a strange way, that made us family too. He became like an uncle to me, someone I could go to for advice or just to reminisce about the woman who'd brought us all together, even if she'd also torn us apart. The biggest shift, though, was in how I saw myself. For so long, I'd felt like I was incomplete, like there was this missing piece of my identity that I could never find. But learning about my mom's past, meeting Michael, and working through all the complicated emotions that came with it, had shown me that I wasn't defined by what I didn't know. I was defined by how I chose to move forward. I was the daughter of a woman who'd made mistakes but loved fiercely. And I was the daughter of a man who'd waited patiently for 23 years to meet me. I was strong because of my mom, and I was compassionate because of Michael. And I was whole. Not because I had all the answers, but because I'd learned to accept the questions. That acceptance was the greatest gift I could have given myself, and it changed everything. Looking back on everything that happened, from that random pizza delivery to meeting my father in Boston, I realized that life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need when you're ready to receive it. If I'd discovered that photo of my mom on David's wall a year earlier, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to handle what came next. But timing, as they say, is everything. And the universe, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, knew that I was ready to uncover the truth about my past, so I could finally start building the future I deserved. This journey taught me that secrets always find a way to surface, and that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living in the shadow of lies. If you've made it this far with me, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like, because sharing this story with you has been part of my healing process, and I hope it helps you too. One of the most important lessons I learned is that people are complicated, and their choices are rarely black and white. My mom wasn't a villain for keeping Michael away from me, and she wasn't a saint for raising me on her own. She was a human being who made decisions based on fear, love, and circumstances I'll probably never fully understand. And that's okay. I don't need to have all the answers to move forward. What I need is the courage to accept that life is messy, that people make mistakes, and that healing requires letting go of the need for everything to make perfect sense. That acceptance has given me a freedom I never knew was possible, and it's allowed me to build relationships that are based on honesty and vulnerability rather than secrets and shame. I also learned that forgiveness is the key to breaking cycles of pain. David spent 25 years holding on to his anger at my mom and Michael, and it poisoned his relationships and his happiness. I could have easily gone down that same path, letting my resentment toward my mom consume me and prevent me from building a relationship with Michael. But I chose differently. I chose to forgive her, to forgive Michael for not fighting harder to find me, to forgive David for his role in all of this, and most importantly, to forgive myself for having complicated feelings. And that choice changed my life. It opened doors I didn't even know existed, and allowed me to create a family that, while unconventional, is filled with love and acceptance. My relationship with Michael continues to grow stronger every day. We've created our own traditions: Sunday morning coffee chats, monthly visits, and an annual trip where we pick a random city and explore it together. He's taught me so much about literature, philosophy, and how to think critically about the world. But more than that, he's shown me what it means to love someone unconditionally, to be patient and understanding even when things are hard. And I've given him something he thought he'd lost forever: the chance to be a father. We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And that's exactly what we're doing, one day at a time. As for my mom, I think about her every day. I visit her grave regularly, bringing flowers and telling her about my life, about Michael, about the peace I've found. I like to think she's proud of me, that wherever she is, she knows I've forgiven her, and that I'm living the life she always wanted for me. A life filled with love, purpose, and the courage to face the truth no matter how painful it might be. She gave me that strength, even if she couldn't always embody it herself. And for that, I'll always be grateful. This journey has shown me that our past doesn't define us. It's what we choose to do with that past that matters. And I'm choosing love, forgiveness, and a future built on honesty rather than secrets. If you've been through something similar, or if you're carrying secrets and pain from your own past, I hope my story inspires you to take that first step toward healing. It won't be easy, but I promise you, it's worth it. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. If you want to see more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning. I'll see you in the next video, where I'll talk about what happened when I finally confronted the last piece of my mom's past. A secret that even Michael didn't know about. You won't want to miss it.